Welcome, everybody, to a very special, very informative, and very important episode of Me, Myself, and I'm Joey G, Bad Bussy on Instagram. And today I'm joined by a very special guest. A friend of mine reached out for me to read their book, read all the things that they've been doing. It's pretty amazing stuff that a lot of us, especially our queer community, we should really be informed and educated on. We have the author of Unsafe Words, Trevor Hoppe, joining us.
Yay, thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk about consent and sex and queer life.
Yes. Yeah, because it's really important. Like, I'm 25 right now, and I feel like in a way I'm kind of going through my second puberty in a way, but this is my more so like real coming of age, real puberty moments. And I find myself in a lot of particular situations and whatnot where I'm needing some of these lessons that are talked about in this book or that are just talked about in general when it comes to the dialogues of consent and whatnot.
Yeah, we don't learn about these things in school. And so that's why me and Shantel Buggs, we co-edited this collection of essays that is fire on how queers do consent, how it looks different, why we need different solutions to sexual harm. Yeah, so it's kind of the book that I dreamed I would have had when I was a young gay boy living in North Carolina, but didn't have.
Got you. Yeah. So what can you describe Unsafe Words to those who might have not read it yet? Because it's a little different than other traditional writing that we've seen. It's multiple essays from a bunch of different types of people. It's a fascinating read though, however.
Thank you. Yeah, so it's a collection of essays from academics, activists, sex workers, thinkers, people who want us to challenge the way we think about sex and consent for queer people, just because the whole Me Too moment was really framed in terms of powerful men harassing mostly white women. And so there's a lot left out in that discussion, a lot left out about how, obviously queer people, like what does consent look like for us? And then also like, people of color in particular just have been left out of this discussion as well. So we have a really diverse lineup of authors from many Black authors, Latino authors, Asian authors, white authors, non-binary authors, trans authors, you kind of name it, everyone is sort of represented. And we wanted to do that so that we could speak, to a kind of broad audience in the queer world. So I think all the essays are framed with that in mind, just to kind of, so there's something for everyone, no matter who you are, there's something in there.
Yeah, that's amazing, especially because the topic of intersectionality has been coming up a lot lately, especially in the queer community, because we are such an intersectional community. We have so many different types of us, and it's not just, the letters listed in our community name, LGBTQ plus. Like, there's ethnicities, backgrounds, and whatnot that come into play that really do change each person's situation by situation. And I just want to ask you, because you talk about it a little bit in the book, and it's expressed via all these different essays. What role does race, gender, power, and class play when it comes to consent, especially within our community?
Oh my gosh, such a big question. I mean, I think, one point that I talk about in my essay is that some people like to sort of imagine that sex could be egalitarian or like two people should be on equal footing. But the reality is that we all come into sex with different kind of social positions. Some of us with more power than others in the bedroom, tops and bottoms in the gay world, white folks and people of color, sex workers and clients. There's always kind of power differentials at play. And so if we ignore those, we miss a kind of crucial point, which is that, we have to find ways to do consent that still recognize that we're not on all equal footing. And that's, I think, one of the things the book does really well is to just imagine all the different ways that we come into this world with different sort of social baggage kind of attached to us, and the way that impacts how we do consent. And it really, if you had the 13 authors on here, they would all give you different kind of perspectives on that, because we're all coming to it from different positions. Me as a white gay man, as a bottom, in my community.
Mhm.
I have my own perspective on that, which is, mostly interacting with tops, and sort of how you negotiate consent as a bottom is different than what it would be like if I was a top. So that's just one sort of, nugget in
Yeah.
the of many, of which there are many.
Yeah, and that's a really good point that I didn't even think about honestly till now. It's like within our own community when it comes to like the environment that is sex within the queer community. It's like there's so many different things, tops, bottoms, there's different fetishes, kinks, and whatnot. And it's like, how do we keep all this fun and still in a way like playfully spontaneous while still keeping respect for the other person and consent in play? Because for me, I identify as verse and I truly mean verse, but because but I find myself, especially like when I'm more so playing the role of the bottom, I like to be more submissive and everything, which is great. And the guys I go after, obviously, when I'm kind of in my bottom bag, if you want to speak, are more dom tops, everything, which is great. And I love it. But at the same time, there have been some people that I've come into interactions with where it's like, okay, slow your roll there. Like, let's keep things comfortable for both of us. Maybe I don't want to have sex on the first hookup. Maybe we could do something that still keeps the roles of like, you're the dominant person in this situation, I'm the submissive one in the situation, but we're not necessarily going to places where maybe one of us are uncomfortable with going to.
Yeah, totally. And like there are ways to do that that keep the fun in sex. As you say, I
Mhm.
like to say fun and play, because sex can be fun and playful, and hopefully is. But the way, one of the responses from Me Too and kind of the heterosexual world has been this. I don't know if you've heard much about enthusiastic consent,
Yeah.
which I get why they sort of, straight people in particular might need that, and some queer people too. We
Mhm.
all have different needs in the bedroom, but as I understand it, that's kind of this idea of like, can I touch you here? Can I do this? Can I do that? And like that just does not resemble my sex life at all. There's not like a
Yeah.
constant. But, if a top says something like, you like that boy or something, like that's a check-in. That's hot. That's like
Yeah.
asking consent without sort of reducing it to this sort of like sterile permission. And I think that that's what I try to find, is those ways to check in. And in my essay, I talk about it just with eyes, like literally looking in someone's eyes, holding that, and like, in very dom sub kind of interactions,
Mm.
verbal stuff is not, you know, sometimes it's supposed to be silent or more anonymous or whatever. You need other tools like safe words. I mean, that's the reason the name of the book is
Right.
Unsafe Words, is that like safe words are a way to allow for a top, usually it's the submissive partner is the one using them, to kind of push your boundaries, because you don't know going into every encounter what you're going to be into in the moment. Like it may depend on who the guy is and how the interaction is, and you may be surprised to find, oh well, I didn't expect to be into that, but you're doing it in a way that is pretty fun. So I'm not, I'm going to let you do that, push that boundary, but if I need it, I can say red, or whatever safe word
Right.
is, and sort of cool things down. And I think queer people have been really good at imagining tools like that allow for fun and spontaneity and play while also respecting people's boundaries.
Yeah. And the idea of safe words is really interesting when you bring it up because I think safe words are good and listening is so good too. Like listening is such a key word everyone uses and boundaries and whatnot. Like, but it really is essential, like in my situations that I've been in on a personal note, like I've been with maybe like a Dom top or whatever. And he's like, you like it? And I'm like, hold on. Like there's ways to kind of like push him off a little bit, but it's like this weird kind of tug of war because the whole kind of, I don't say like point of that game, but for lack of better terms, point of that game is like, let's see how far you could go. But it's like, if I'm literally like gently pushing you off of me, like maybe you should get that note to like pull it out just a little bit because I need a second, you know, because then by them listening and like understanding, like what we kind of touched you earlier, like that's hot. and then I'll make me be like, okay, after this timeout, I'm ready to go back for round two or whatnot. So it's like listening is almost just as important as like the words being said or not being
Yeah,
said.
totally. Communication is not just words, it's also body language, it's
Mm-hmm.
shifting and weights, it's like expressions on your face, it's all these other things that we kind of intuitively know. And then and that's, you know, the book just responds to the fact that it's like sometimes people writing about sex, it seems so out of touch. It just doesn't
Yeah.
seem like, are you having sex? Is this like is
Right.
this real? Like, is it doesn't look
Exactly.
like my sex life. And a lot of essays kind of talk about that we, you know, that we try to be practical in the way that we talk about
Mm.
consent. And so I hope that people reading the book find those tools to think more about them, because I think we all do them without thinking about them. But if we can become more aware of them and sort of promote that kind of checking in and that kind of communication,
Mm.
you know, we can do consent even better than we are.
I see. I also wanted to ask you too, because like this has always been like a topic amongst like my friend groups and whatnot, just like I guess as us queer people, like we always talk about cruising and whatnot, like if you're at the gym or in a locker room, whatever. How does consent play within those type of confines?
Oh, yes. I mean, like in a bathhouse or a back room, like literally that you're not supposed to talk. Like talking kind of like is seen as killing the vibe. So
Yeah.
obviously words are not going to function in the same way. Alexander Cheves has an essay talking about back rooms in the book, and he you know, he talks about a nod, a nudge, you know, a kind of give and take, but also they're just different rules of engagement. It's not like walking on the street. um and you kind of have to be attuned with those rules. And the trouble is that we don't all, you know, there's no like guidebook going into a bathhouse. Like, okay, this is how you find out if someone's into you.
Right.
And so there's another essay from Buchanan, who's a non-binary um, trans man, and talks about sort of failures in a bathhouse where he felt
Mhm.
like he was assaulted because he sort of wasn't aware of the rules going in, and feels like bathhouses could do more to kind of promote, you know, make everyone aware of what's
Yeah.
going on and kind of the rules of engagement. And there are those violations that happen that um, obviously we can do better. Like queer people aren't perfect, and obviously, and our space is as radical and as, like, you know, when you talk to straight friends about bathhouses, they're like, what, you know, like
What is that? Yeah.
we have a different set of resources available to us. As amazing as those spaces are, they can be even better if we you know, Blue argues in their essay, if we put everyone on, we make everyone more prepared going in, sort of knowing those rules of engagement.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's like cruising really like, especially now with like sniffies and everything, like it really exists everywhere. Like I've had some cruising instances that like successful trips that I've worked without even planning them at like my gym and my locker room. These are years ago, like in college and whatnot. But my whole concern about that, one, I find that hot, and that's like a huge, I guess, like fetish or kink of mine. But the whole time I'm thinking, it's not just like, oh, is this guy into me? It's like, I don't want to make this person uncomfortable. Like,
Right.
I don't want to make this person weirded out because say we're in a locker room, you know, you make eye contact with somebody. Yeah, it can be that type of eye contact that's giving the green light to like, okay, let's move over to the shower or whatnot. But also like it could just be like acknowledgement of another human being in a locker room. It could be a hello. So for me, I don't want to look like, and I don't even, not even like I don't want to look like, I don't want to make somebody uncomfortable by reaching for like my dick all of a sudden in the middle of a locker room and they're just like, what are you doing? Then suddenly I'm getting kicked out of the gym and I can never go there. My membership is revoked. So it's just like I'm just vocalizing that just because I'm really realizing how important consent is and how kind of under the rug it goes when it comes to a lot of these different situations. They don't even have to be one-on-one intimate, like in your bedroom with your partner or with like a hookup buddy you found from like a app or whatnot. Like it really does exist everywhere. And in these clubs now that have dark rooms and everything, like it exists there as well, because everyone has their own type of limits. It just depends on like how much people are willing to listen to those and be receptive of those.
Yeah, and I think it varies by the space because a sauna at the gym, not everyone is in there for sex, right? I mean,
Right.
a lot of them are just there to be in the sauna.
Literally.
When you're at the bathhouse, that is an explicitly marked sexual space, or you're in the back room. So public cruising is kind of a different phenomenon and a different skill set. I'll say I am terrible. It's not my skill set. I
Uh-huh.
am good at reading all those kind of things. So I would definitely be the one to like make some kind of mistake. So I stick to what I'm good at.
Gotcha. Yeah,
Because I like on the internet, like on Sniffies or whatever, or Grinder or wherever, you can make really clear what you're looking for before you ever meet up. So there's no question of like what you're into at a base level because you've already kind of arranged that, and that works better for me. So I think for different people, we have our own skill sets.
yeah.
So if you're good at the public cruising thing, I think that's amazing. I wish I could be better at that. It's not.
Yeah, I feel like I've kind of lost my magic when it comes to that because I'm a little like over hypersensitive and then I end up missing out on an interaction that could have happened just because I was thinking too much up here. But hey, I'd rather be safer than sorry and make sure that person's fine without crossing some potential border or limit or boundary, But I also wanted to ask you too, when it comes to your essays also in making this book, you mentioned that like this is the book like you wish you had growing up in North Carolina. So it's what stories kind of inspired you in your own life to write your own personal essay within this book?
Yeah. Um, I opened my essay talking about what a mentor, an older mentor who came of age in the 70s relayed to me, which is that the first time he had sex, he was in college. It was with another college student. It was the 1970s. Neither of them had a clue what gay sex meant, but they had heard that it involved Vaseline. So they just covered each other in Vaseline and like rolled around for a while because they didn't know what it was. And I think to me that was, obviously we know what gay sex is now. Porn you can access that at any age, but still we don't know exactly what turns us on until we're kind of in the moment. And so that's what my essay is really about, is like figuring out what you're into.
Yeah.
Which is like a lifelong thing. It changes over time. You can be surprised. And I really have found value in finding tools for consent that allow that flexibility, like safe words or body language, other kinds of practices that still achieve consent, but don't kind of look like this enthusiastic consent model of can I do this? Can I do this? Can I do that? Can I do that? So I think my essay is sort of a homage to coming of age and finding your sexual self while also trying to do it in a way that is consensual. And that's harder than we realize. We don't really know until we're in the moment and someone's doing something we don't want them to do.
Right.
And we're like, oh, fuck, how do I get this person to stop?
Yeah.
Or how do I get out of this situation? And we're not well prepared for that. We're not well prepared to say yes, and we're not well prepared to say no. So I think the book hopefully will get people thinking about both of those things, how you say yes and no. Those are skills we definitely sorely need.
Yeah. And so when you're in that type of predicament where you're like, oh no, I don't like this, I need to speak up and say no, what from your own personal situations, if you've ever been in that type of situation, what note do you have to others when it comes to being in that? Like, how do you speak up in that situation? Because it's like that voice is in there screaming and being like, okay, I don't like this, but the one out here kind of could tend to disassociate and just kind of forget about it and just kind of float through the situation. So how do you make sure that voice inside is heard?
Absolutely. That's a big challenge to say no. I think the one instance I talk about in the book, I was living in San Francisco and I was hooking up with this guy, and it started off very kind of predictably, sort of making out, walking backwards to the bedroom. We started hooking up. It was going well. And then we started to have sex, and he moved too fast. And I was like, I said something like, stop or something like that, or tried to pull away. And he was like, oh, no, you don't. And he like pushed ahead even harder. And I kind of froze up, but my response was to throw him off of me. He was a lot bigger than me, but I don't know if it's adrenaline or what in the moment. I just flipped him off of me and exited the situation very quickly. And looking back on that, I think I could have verbally done something different, but I also think that mostly he just was misreading the situation and thought I was playing out some kind of rape fantasy or something. But we hadn't discussed that at all beforehand. So I think you do have to say no. And I know that that's hard. As a bottom, like, so much of it is about pleasing your partner and of being submissive. And so you're not inclined to do that because this role play is so set up in this kind of dyadic relationship of you doing what they want.
Yeah.
And, I experienced that with condoms, for example, back when condoms were a thing before PrEP, that, tops wouldn't want to use them. And, I'm taking more of the risk as the bottom. And so it was difficult to assert that. PrEP changed that game, where I have the power to protect myself by not relying. I don't have to rely on them to use a condom. So I think it's been a lifelong struggle to find the words, whether they're no or just asserting what you want better. I don't know that there's any formula that's perfect for people, right? But if it feels wrong, you have to speak up. And I say that fully knowing that I've been in situations where I didn't speak up, where I went along with things that I was uncomfortable with, and that didn't. There are also situations like that are not assault. It's just sort of like bad sex. Their breath is bad, and I keep kissing them. It's like I didn't want to do that, but I didn't really know how to.
For it anyways.
So there's a gradient of experiences from assault to just sort of bad or uncomfortable sex, and I've definitely run the gamut of those kinds of experiences. And you just have to learn to speak up for yourself. And boy, that's hard. But I think it's a skill that maybe, I hate to say it, but sex ed classes need to really role play that kind of stuff. To just be able to know, hey, this is a phrase that I could utter to sort of pause the situation.
Right. Yeah. And that's a good point when it comes to education. They really don't touch on it. They just tell you what's what, how to do it, and move on. And they don't even, to begin with, they don't even dive into queer sex life and whatnot. They just tell you about it from a hetero perspective. So it's just okay, thanks for all the help, And for me, I found power and consent through doing a bunch of other activities. So I box and do a lot of fitness type activities where it involves you getting kind of, I don't say attacked, but preyed upon, and it's up to you to defend yourself, but also if it does get a little too much within practice, to speak up and just be like, hey, hold on, give me a second, that's a little too rough now, let's reset, whatnot. So they really do need to find ways to talk about that, especially because this happens to a lot of young kids, unfortunately, too. And that's how queer kids too specifically go off onto Grindr, Sniffies, and maybe land onto the wrong people and then have to find out their lesson the hard way, which we don't want people to have to do, of course.
Yeah, we need to give tools for people to protect themselves, and then we need to also give tools for especially tops, but I'm sure bottoms can do it too, of steamrolling over their partner's desires without checking in. So it definitely goes both ways, just in heterosexual context. Men need to be taught not to assault women, just as women need tools in the moment to be able to protect themselves. We can't focus just on sort of just the protecting yourself aspect. It has to be also giving people tools to protect their partners. And and check in with their partners.
Yeah. And I was going to ask that too, because I think the same thing could happen reverse as well, just like how, women could be the one to uh, put their male partner in a sexually uncomfortable place. The same could happen from a bottom to a top. So how can those bottoms kind of understand that lesson clearly? I don't know how to address them in a more politically correct way besides those bottoms. But yeah, how has that dynamic kind of been shown from things that you've heard or essays you've read?
Well, in general, I would just say as a gay man on these apps, there are a lot of guys you'll encounter who don't want to talk at all about what they're into, and they'll just say looking, now, address.
Yeah.
And it's like, wow, that is not a lot of information to go off of. And I get the appeal of that, and I get why some people want to do that. At least for myself, what I've found is if I have forced a bigger conversation about specifically what are you into? Are you into kissing? Are you into
Right.
this? Are you into that? So that I can be a better informed person going into this situation. So at the very least, if your sex life initiates online, and I think for a lot of queer men, especially, that's where we sort of start for a lot of us. Having a more involved conversation about what's cool and what's not is really, really key. And I find that some guys are willing to have that. And I find that some guys just don't respond or don't even want to. And I just let those guys go, right? There's other fish in the pond. Like I don't meet up with people who are not able to articulate what they want to do. And so that's one tool that I've developed over time. And it's hard, especially if they're hot and you really want to hook up with them. Like,
Yeah.
it can be a challenge, but like, if something just seems off, I don't meet up. Or if they're not able to say, or if they're into something, if they seem to be really into something that I'm not into. And that's hard, especially when you're horny, to make those kinds of logical decisions. But
Yep.
I'm sure it saved me from a lot of unpleasant sexual encounters.
Yeah, for sure. And earlier you mentioned, and kind of one of the MOs of the book is to challenge the standard setup via the Me Too movement that were set up by straight people and the hetero world per se. So how do we respond to that, and how do we rewrite those rules and be like, okay, we believe in Me Too, but this is how we are going to do it? How do we start that?
I think queer people already are, right? I mean, the reality is that many of us are having sex in ways that are ethical, are playful, are sexy, and that are not that do not result in assault, right? I mean, I think hopefully that's most of the sex we're having, if not all the sex we're having. So I think queer people are doing it already. The book is just more about verbalizing that and speaking truth to power in some way, because there's been a lot of silence, I think, especially in kind of like the queer Twitterverse or whatever, like trying to say anything that's against the grain, to be like, hey, this enthusiastic model, I'm not sure it works for me. Just even trying to have that conversation, you could be, I mean, just attacked for trying to speak more diversity into the conversation, because and I sort of get the impulse, because heterosexual sex seems dreadful. I am grateful every day of my life that I am not a heterosexual man.
Same.
I mean, like, I can't imagine being a woman and having to try to have sex with heterosexual men. When you have sex as a woman, you are very quickly labeled a whore. They have to walk this fine line of being sexy, while at the same time trying to be perceived as not actually having any sex.
Right.
It's impossible. And one of the essays by Jane Ward in the book talks about like that reality. She's the author of The Tragedy of Heterosexuality, a title which I love, her book. Her essay on lesbian sexual ethics, is like, we don't have to deal with heterosexual men. Our sex lives look really different as women. So maybe we don't need the same interventions that straight people need to have ethical
Yeah.
sex. So I just think I think we're already doing it. It's just a lot of it, there's a lot of pressure to not talk about it in ways that are honest. And so the book is painfully honest at times. Like my mom read my essay and I was like, oh,
Yeah, that's hard.
God, like I didn't think about that when I wrote the book, but
Yeah.
but you know, she's not my target audience necessarily,
Right.
but I tried to be really honest in my essay
Hmm.
to a fault of what my experiences are like having sex. And I think all the authors come with that kind of fresh honesty in the face of this, like I said, just silence.
Yeah, got you. And going to the rules of Me Too set by straight people, you said that those concepts after a while could kind of end up being harmful. How can it lead to that harmful place if we just continue following those rules and those intentions that weren't set for
Well,
us?
I think it creates this false standard where I see this among my students, for example, young
Mhm.
people, where they perceive any sex outside of that enthusiastic model as assault. And
Mm,
that's a problem because that conflates all sorts of things that are not assault with assault. We need to be able to really be clear what
right.
assault looks like because I tell this to my students all the time. We talk about like alcohol use, like, you know, especially among college students, they have this whole conversation about like,
Yeah.
oh, if you're drinking, you know, you can't consent to sex. And I'm like, well, if that was true, I've been assaulted hundreds of times in my life. And that's not the reality.
What
Like, I have
happened?
had
Yeah.
sex when I'm drunk. I have made decisions when I'm drunk that resulted in sex, and I don't feel assaulted by those encounters. At the same time, of course, there's a limit to that. If you have a partner who can't sit up straight, that's
Of
different.
course. Yeah.
That's fundamentally different. But they conflate all of that together
Yeah.
because that's just been this sort of dogmatic message is like, you know, consent is this very narrow thing.
Yeah.
Uh, which it's just like that's just not the way the world works. And so if you can't see assault uh, clearly,
Mhm.
I think it can make a lot of people scared of sex because it looks like all sex is assault. And my God, I mean, that's a really sad way to see the world. And again, heterosexuals, they're in a different, you know, I'm putting that aside. I don't live in that world, and I don't have to sort of the sex that I have is not sort of in that confine. So I think we as queer people have a little more freedom to play, and we should be able to explore that freedom without being accused of assaultive behavior for what is really just normal everyday sex.
Yeah, and that's the thing. That example you make with your students is a really good example because kind of through the oversaturating of things that really aren't assault and labeling them as assault makes it blurry as to what is assault, which it shouldn't be.
Yeah.
You know, it kind of fogs up that lens as to like, okay, so if all this is assault, then what is actually like real assault, which we shouldn't be asking that. You know, when something happens, you should be able to tell your friend or whoever, God forbid it happens, and be like, no, like this is something serious that happens. You need to go handle this the way you need to, whether that be go get help, etc. and whatnot. So it's a very good point that you bring up about everyone kind of labeling everything that doesn't have that enthusiastic yes as like assault.
Exactly. I think we can do better and critically, I think if we want to have fun sex lives,
Yeah.
and I don't want to sort of create a world where there's just all this fear and stigma about
Mhm.
sex because it looks so dangerous. And it can be dangerous, but it's, you know, we can do things to make it less so and to practice sex more ethically. Um, so I really hope that the book gives people tools to do that, to find more ethical, playful, pleasurable ways to have sex.
Yeah, definitely. And I just have a few more questions also. I wanted to ask you too, and this is very relevant, especially in terms of like what's been shown on the news and what's just been happening within our country on a very grand scale in the past few years, is the idea of police force and whatnot. So how do we keep those safe, but also how do we say something happens, you're in a situation and such person that may have assaulted you needs to be handled. We don't necessarily want to call the police because the police most likely are racist, transphobic, homophobic, etc. and whatnot. So it's like, what authority do we call when we're in those situations that need some type of supervision or authority in?
Yeah, there are several essays at the end of the book that think about that question because, we live in a world where the police are supposed to be the recourse here, but we know that police are transphobic, racist, sexist, and do not, Dominique Morgan in her interview, I interviewed her in the last chapter of the book. She's a prison abolitionist and trans activist. And she's like, the police have never given me justice. That's not something I could see them giving me. So, we don't have answers always in the book. What we do know is that, the police are not going to set us free. Like they're not going to give us the tools that queer people need to have ethical sex and to resolve harm when it does occur. And of course it does occur. Dominique Morgan in her interview, she talks about, being the victim of sexual assault at the hands of correctional officers when she was in prison.
Yeah.
So, she looks to those authority figures and sees they're not just not going to help, they can be perpetrators, right?
Yeah.
And so I think it's really complicated. And unfortunately, so much of the response has been about punishment and not been about prevention. We've been so focused on how do we punish people better that it's like, well, we can also try to get out there and educate people better through sex education, public awareness campaigns. There are all sorts of tools that we could use, getting a movie line in a TV show or a movie. There are ways to get out there, messages in the world to try to prevent harm before it happens. So I think that's what a lot of people in the book are committed to is to try to think about prevention as well. Of course, punishment may be appropriate in some contexts. But we know even in heterosexual contexts where there were clearly harmful acts, there was really much question about it, and people still don't get punished under the law. They walk free.
Yeah.
So it's like the police cannot be our only solution. The law is not always our friend. We've got to come up with other ways to do it. So, Blue in their essay talking about bathhouses better preparing people who enter with tools to practice ethical sex, sex education that does a better job of talking about queer sex at all, about pleasure, about consent. It's all about HIV and pregnancy, really, and scaring people. We can do so much better. Punishment isn't going to set us free from this problem of assault. And like I said, the book sometimes asks more questions than it's able to answer, but at least just getting a conversation to started that says, hey, is the criminal justice system really the best tool for us here?
Yeah.
Many of the authors in the book don't think so.
Yeah, I agree. I wanted to ask you two more questions. This is a total side note, but when I was reading the essays, I thought of this one show and I wondered if you watched it. It's called I May Destroy You, and it's on HBO Max. It was created by Michaela Cole.
Yes.
Have you seen it?
She's a rock star. Yes. Love them so much. Yeah.
She's incredible. What do you think about that, especially considering the essays at hand and your work within this?
Yeah, I'm trying to recall the kind of storyline, but as I recall, there's an assault. It's covered up. Is that right? And then
there was a few different examples of assault. There was her own personal assault that happened where I think her partner at the time said they were using a condom, but he didn't. That was one of them. And then the other one was she got drugged and raped, trigger warning.
Yeah.
And I think that was the first episode. And then there was an example with her friend who identified as queer on Grindr and other dating apps and whatnot. I think that show did an exceptional job.
Well, yeah, and I don't want to give away the end, but as I recall, the way she ends up not resolving, but the way that she seeks justice is not through the law, but through a public sort of an encounter.
Yep.
And I think that's what Me Too has done so powerfully, is to say, Alyssa Milano and other actresses being like, Harvey Weinstein's still walking around, and police aren't doing anything about it. We have to find a
Yeah.
way to seek remedy that's outside the law. And I'm not saying I'm encouraging people to go on Twitter and, you know, make accusations that way. It
Right.
is one tool that seems that has power, and I think there are probably, unfortunately, that's the reality we live in. Is that when the law doesn't serve us, you know, we have to look for these other recourses. And so I think the show spoke to that powerfully. That
Yeah.
you know, when the law doesn't do its job, people will find other people can. I'm not. They often don't, of course, but they can find these other avenues to try to seek accountability. So I love the show. I love that actress and everything that she does. Again, I think it's such a heterosexual context that its applicability to queer people is you know, maybe not 100%, but was nonetheless compelling to think about what we do when the law fails us.
Yeah, and that's the thing when it comes to the law failing us, when it comes to those things, using those platforms like Twitter and such like that are really helpful. And like you named like the actresses that called out Harvey Weinstein with his whole thing and whatnot. It's like, yes, as much as we want these people to receive punishment, the law just sometimes like does not care, does not put time for that. So the most you can do and the most helpful thing you can do is let your peers know, like breed the idea of awareness in people. So at least they know, especially like for that instance, like Alyssa Milano and all those other actresses that they were speaking to their community. They're speaking to their coworkers, essentially being like, hey, this guy in office, if you ever run into him, stay away, maybe not work on a project of his, even though it might be rewarding financially. But like, I find that still just as powerful as finding some type of lawful punishment against the person. Cause it's like, if you can't do that, then the next best thing, which could ultimately end up being the best thing, is just at least awareness. So people know that, hey, unfortunately, this sick dude is floating around somewhere, but do your best to stay away from them. And hopefully one of these days they could end up getting some type of punishment that could actually keep them away from people. Or
Yeah,
even sometimes that awareness could, it obviously affects his career. Like you don't see him making movies anymore and whatnot. So there's still an element of that punishment in there, but I still more so find the awareness the more valuable thing to take away.
yeah. Shout out to Courtney Love, who I think tried to do that in like an early '90s interview, where she was
Yep,
like,
early.
"You were invited to Harvey Weinstein's house. Do not go there."
Yeah.
So definitely, um, talking about these things, even just among your friend group, you know, can be powerful. Not even just therapeutic, but also from a community level to raise awareness that there are people perpetrating harm.
Yeah, completely. Because there's been some people that like we know in the nightlife scene and whatnot that maybe I've had a weird interaction with physically and whatnot. I'm not gonna go on Twitter and let everybody have it, but I'll let my friends know, just like, hey, yeah, that guy, if you ever ask you on a date, do what you will. But with my own personal interaction, things got a little uncomfortable and touchy and that weren't accepted on mutual terms. So that awareness is all you could do
Yeah.
sometimes, And the last question I wanted to ask you and kind of address is that these essays are dedicated to Mistress Velvet.
Mm.
Can you let everybody know who she is and what importance does she play within Unsafe Words?
Oh, yeah. Mistress Velvet was an icon, a Black sex worker working in Chicago who was a dominatrix and was widely reported in several years ago in the media for requiring her white male clientele to read Black feminist theory as part of her like domination program, which was just iconic and inspirational and attempting to seek, you know, out of this sort of racial fetish world that she was operating in, to seek some kind of like remedy and awareness and transformation along the way and in the process. And I am very grateful that she was able to contribute an essay to the book before she passed away in 2021. Essay is about race play and how race play can both be transformational and challenge racial assumptions, while also, you know, it's not a panacea. It's not going to set us free. That it's still operating in this racialized, racist context. So she tries to deal with those contradictions as a Black dominatrix, working with mostly or entirely white male clientele. Try to think through the possibilities, but also the limitations. So I love their essay, and we dedicated the book to them because it felt like not just the right thing to do. It's just, she is a fucking icon, and even if she was alive, the book should still be dedicated to her because she inspires me every day.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you, and thank you for that sentiment, especially. So I appreciate you so much. I'm so glad we talked. This is like one of my most memorable conversations for y'all. So I appreciate you. You're great energy, informative, everything, especially all the work that you put into these essays. And I really, really enjoyed it. I'm very thankful for it. So thank you for taking your time to chat with me. Thank you. How can everyone read Unsafe Words and be educated and stay safe out there, especially summer kind of around the corner, Pride season, all that?
Oh yeah, no, good point. So Unsafe Words is available anywhere fine books are sold. You can get it direct from Rutgers, Rutgers University Press, or you can go on Amazon, or your local bookstore hopefully also carries it. Wherever you find books, it is available. And buy your friends copies. Make it
Book club.
Book club, yes. Oh my God. And if anyone wants one of the authors to zoom in for a book club or something, feel free to reach out. I'm sure we could probably make it happen.
Amazing. How can people stay safe in general when it comes to this topic?
Have fun, be aware of your boundaries, express, speak up when something isn't going exactly as you had hoped. So that's how I found finding the words. Just find the words. Practice finding the words.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much. I hope we stay in touch, please. And any other works you have that you want to come here and talk about, I'd love to.
Thank you, Joey. I really appreciate it.
Of course. I'll talk to you soon. I'll see you later. Everyone, thank you for tuning in. Remember, go get Unsafe Words, go read it, all that, talk about it to your friends. This is very important. And yeah, keep our community safe. So thank you for tuning in, and we'll see y'all next week.